ladies and gentlemen, I hope you are excited to learn all about the Esports World Cup. Good morning, chat. Today, we are going to be looking into the Esports World Cup, giving you a preview stream of the 3 North American teams that are heading to the Esports World Cup. I'm going to be telling you what I think about all 3 teams from North America, what their chances are, what their biggest strengths are, and what I think is going to be their best tools that they can use to propel themselves deep into this tournament. Obviously, Esports World Cup is the biggest tournament of the summer. It's going to be held this week with a bunch of good teams attending. And so we're going to go over exactly what my thoughts are heading into this, specifically focusing on North Americans. Now, before we go in to the teams that have made it to the Esports World Cup from North America, those are Space Station, Luminosity, and Dark Zero, should quickly talk about the teams that didn't make it, most notably Beast Coast. The major champions will not be at the Esports World Cup. They failed to qualify after losing to Sonics in the closed qualifiers, which knocked them out of contention from 1 BO3. Technically, they lost 2 BO3s to Sonics, but the one they lost was the important one, and that came in the closed qualifiers. I'm not too concerned about Beast Coast. I still expect them to be some of the favorites going into Montreal and going into Stage 2. The format for both qualifications and the tournament itself is very unforgiving. We are likely to see a lot of upsets inside the tournament, as we already have through the qualifiers. There's a lot of teams heading to the Esports World Cup that probably aren't considered some of the greatest teams in the world. And one of those teams is Luminosity. Attending their first ever international tournament, LG are a super young squad that nobody predicted ahead of this tournament to actually make it to the Esports World Cup. Everybody thought Luminosity, you know what, they're kind of just a group of friends. They don't have any experience. Not a single one of their players has made it to an international tournament before this, but they're looking pretty good. They joined the NAL less than a year ago by jumping into the NAL with a roster built around Silent and Eddie, who have been a duo in Tier 2 Siege for forever, and they finished 8th place. Not a great standings, and they decided to completely revamp their roster. They dropped 3 of their players, and they pulled in Kixro, Wi-Fi, and Hat for Stage 2, which brought them up to 5th place, where they were pretty consistently winning games against top teams and pushing top teams to the limit when they got into playoffs. Now, they didn't get to keep that 5-man roster because over the offseason, after the major ended, Hat was picked up by Oxygen Esports. Luminosity don't have the tightest grip on their players, shall we say. And so when Oxygen came knocking, they were able to pay a little bit more money and grab Hat for their roster. So that means Hat is no longer playing with this team, and LG had to pick up Surf as a replacement, who spent most of Stage 1 playing for Karn & Co, trying to qualify for the LCQ. Now, I want to talk about the playstyle of LG a little bit, because I think it's really tempting to look at a young team like LG without many experienced players and think to yourself, this is a team of young gunners. This is a team of frag-heavy players who don't really have strategies. They're going to run around and try to get kills. And for previous iterations of LG, like the roster that was in Pro League back in 2019, I think that was pretty fair. This team from 2019 with Doodle, Hyena, Rex, and Factor Jarvis kind of had a perception of being all aim, no brain. Certainly talented players, but they didn't really have the same structure and coordination that other top teams have. But I don't think that's fair to say of the new and improved Luminosity roster that they have now. The new LG team is built around not insane mechanical gunplay, not ridiculous strats, but instead is built around friendship. This team has often been called a friendship team by both critics and supporters alike, but I think that's a bit of their strength. The more coordination that you see from this team is actually pretty impressive. You don't see this level of coordination from most teams that have the players that LG have, right? The type of players who have never been to a Tier 1 event before, who participate in Tier 1 leagues, but have spent a lot of time in Tier 2 and have never really found success in those Tier 1 leagues beyond kind of what they've just recently achieved. And I want to show you around, just kind of give you a taste of what we can expect from LG and how they kind of work as a unit, because they're really not a team that will just run and gun and try to win every single engagement and play without brains. So this is a round from the qualifiers, and I think it perfectly kind of showcases the playstyle of this team. It's a Night Haven attack, and instead of rushing in, they're going to start their execute with some Ying plays from Silent. They get on in, immediately it goes poorly, but they have problem-solving abilities. Immediately, they get that trade by walking in with a second player, and then they slow things down. They understand that, hey, our push didn't go well right off the bat. We didn't find perfect immediate success. They're not now going to just bang their heads against the wall and full commit to a push that didn't start off amazing for them. They're going to slow it down. They're going to get their drones inside the bomb site. They're going to talk amongst their teammates about what the solutions are to these problems. And they're going to hold angles. Kixrow, at the moment, way up above, holding an IT wall, catches Ashen with this moment of pause, with this taking their time, slow approach to the round. They find a pick onto Ashen, who's overstepping, who's worried about what pushes might come through. And LG continue to successfully slow this round down and find picks around the map, knowing they don't have to commit to a bad push when it starts going poorly. We see another pick coming in from Surf, and all of a sudden LG are in the 4v1. Even in this 4v1, they don't overextend. They get a drone in onto Faults. They slowly start working the bomb site. They try to get the best information that they can. And eventually, with Faults rotating up towards the top floor, they get in towards the site control, they start the plants, and they really collapse around their planter. They play other people in the bomb site, both to win this gunfight here and stop the vertical angles, but also so that if their planter had died, they could jump on it. The key thing I want to kind of highlight with this round is it's not a crazy chaotic round. It's very slow, it's very measured, and it's a great example of how LG like to play certain types of rounds. Now, Luminosity are not a team that statistically are going to have one player pop off and carry the entire roster. It's not a team with one big statistics superstar that you expect to see carrying the entire roster. The closest you're going to get are probably either Kixrow, who had the best KD of any player throughout the stage 1 of Luminosity, or Silent, because Silent is typically the guy who plays the more traditional Ashe, Roam roles, where he's going to be kind of the entry player. Played a lot of Ashe, a lot of Solus back in stage 1 as well. Interestingly, Hat actually had the worst KD of any player on the team, but I don't think that's a huge problem for Luminosity, or maybe for Oxygen for picking up Hat. Hat is a player who had really good looking games where he looked like the best player on the roster, and then some poorer looking games as well. He was a little bit inconsistent. So I think those high games and that potential is probably why Oxygen wanted to pick up Hat. But fundamentally, I don't think it's a huge blow to Luminosity that is going to make them any weaker than they were going forward. I want to take a look at the 4 games that Luminosity played to get to the Esports World Cup. The 4 matches they had to win in both the open qualifiers and the closed qualifiers. And I want to dive into the map pool a little bit of Luminosity Gaming. We talked a bit about their playstyle. I want to talk about some specific maps that are going to be a problem. And there's one in the background right now. I think you can probably guess what map that is. It's the strongest map for LG. It is the best map that they have in their map pool, and it's Skyscraper. You can see in the 4 games that they played coming into the Esports World Cup, this map was either banned against them in very early phases, or it was a dominant win over certain teams. Now, unfortunately, we don't actually know the scoreline or how that Skyscraper game went against M80. This is the only time they actually ended up playing it, was against M80 in the decider match. This was the end of the open qualifiers. Not the most important game, but still a notable game. Every other team ended up banning the map against Luminosity, which shows me that the other teams are a little bit afraid of LG on this map. And they have good reason to be afraid of LG on this map. Throughout the year, Luminosity have yet to lose Skyscraper in an official match. They beat M80 for 7-5. That was a huge game that kind of put LG on the map. At the start of the stage, nobody thought they'd beat M80 going into that game, and they started off with some poor attacks, but they clutched up on defense. They won this game 7-5 against M80, maybe the most notable game that LG played through the entirety of the group stage in stage 1. Then they beat Space Station on the map 7-3. Now, this was simply a seeding game, so there were not the highest of stakes in this match, but still a good showing from Luminosity, showcasing what they can do on this map. And then, of course, again, beating M80, not a map that we really have a lot of info on. Obviously, this is a good map for Luminosity. They've got the results to prove it, and the opponents have been banning it against them, so the league in North America clearly thinks it's a strong map for them. They have the results to prove it. But the only VOD that we really have, the only game that I have watched from Luminosity, was this 7-5 against M80. And unfortunately, that 7-5 against M80 was really a Hat masterclass. The stats from LG I don't think are misleading. The one real VOD we have from M80 on this map showcased the story of Hat having a life game, going 16-7 and absolutely destroying M80. M80 were on a 4-1 lead. They looked like they were going to be winning this game, and Hat went nuclear to pull this one back. Now, obviously, LG have results on the map since losing Hat. They beat M80 on this map without having Hat. But because we haven't actually seen them play this map without Hat on their roster, I don't think we can say with 100% certainty that this is still a dominant map from LG. And I think it's likely that when we get to the Esports World Cup, other teams outside of North America are going to be willing to test Luminosity on this map. So when we're looking at the maps in the pool, when we're looking at what is maybe LG's strongest map on paper, I would argue that it is Skyscraper, and I would argue that we don't really know exactly how strong it is. So it'll be interesting to see when we get to the Esports World Cup how strong it is for Luminosity, what they do well on that map, and if they can really hold up to international teams when playing on Skyscraper. Now, of course, it's not the only map that LG played well, and there's two other maps I think are worth discussing for LG that are likely to be real key maps for them at the Esports World Cup. The first one is Bank, and the second one is Nighthaven. Bank is another one that's kind of tough to analyze. Obviously, a lot of their opponents banned Bank against LG. Carnico banned it against them second phase. LG picked the map and, of course, ended up winning it against M80. They picked the map a second time against M80 when they found the rematch. They did lose that one. And then it was the decider against Space Station, but it was not seen because that was a 2-0 game. Bank is kind of tough to analyze because the only time we saw them play in Stage 1 was that SSG seeding match, and it was only an 8-7 victory. So that's not a map that we really have a ton of info on. The second time they played it in Stage 1 was against Los Mangos, which you may know now as Fluffy Aimers if you've been watching Element 3. It's clearly a map that LG enjoy playing a lot, but similar to Skyscraper, it's a map that's kind of tough to say how good LG really are because we don't have a lot of good quality VODs on this map. And of course, when I'm saying this, and this is what I'm seeing as an outsider POV, this is also what enemy teams are going to be seeing. So the numbers seem to suggest that Skyscraper and Bank are really strong maps for Luminosity. We don't have great evidence of that necessarily, and it'll be really interesting to see if other international teams want to test LG on Bank. Labs is a little bit more interesting because we did get to see a lot of Labs gameplay. In fact, specifically, we got to see Nighthaven Labs when Luminosity picked it against SSG Academy, and I thought primarily they did well on this map on their defenses. They got 3 good attacks on Nighthaven Labs. They split the first half 3-3, and then on defense, they won 4 of their rounds, lost 2 of them. On those defenses, they locked down top floor really well with a strong kind of Mira two-brow bandit setup. They did a great job locking down the walls. And then they use good shield operators like Frost, like Recruit to lock down kind of Aqua and Rafters. I want to show you what their basement defenses look like because they were a little bit more, shall we say, unorthodox than what they held on the other bomb sites. They did a lot of roaming, and this is the second time they played the round. They ended up roaming really heavily against SSG Academy, and you can see at the start the roam doesn't go super well. Yes, they get the opening pick with Kixrow hitting a great shot onto Ashen, but they start to lose bodies after that. You can see they've dedicated a lot of resources to this roam. You saw a castle barricade just there. There's goo mines all around the map. There's going to be mute jammers and maybe some dread mines up here. So they clearly dedicated a lot of resources to this top floor roam, but despite that, it doesn't go perfectly for them. I believe this is Kixrow getting punished inside of vending right here. He does go down, and then with 2 players inside of cafeteria, one of them gets punished right off the rip as well. But because they have so many roamers, they still have Eddie, who's roaming inside of cafeteria, who I don't believe is currently known for Space Station, and they start to bring their other players up. Look at this. They've got now 2 players who have rotated outside of the basement. Not a single person is actually on the bomb site, with Wi-Fi and Surf both moving up the staircases to try to support the rest of the players in terms of Eddie. And this play from them, from SSG, really starts to go well. And Wi-Fi is actually ratting inside of control. Proning inside of one of the bomb sites, Surf is moving up the bending stairs to try to help out his teammates. And with Eddie getting a pick, it's this kind of aggressive playstyle from Luminosity that eventually wins this round for LG, beats out Space Station, catches them off guard, and will win them the game, ultimately sending themselves up 1-0 in this series. Now, this is a playstyle that LG can do very well, and it's certainly impressive, but it's also a playstyle that if international opponents who have done their VOD review are coming into and are expecting, I think they'll be able to shut down. You know, this is the type of playstyle that can certainly work in high-pressure moments, especially when your opponents start tilting, especially when you're typing a lot to them, assuming they haven't muted your whole roster, which internationally, if teams know what they're doing, they will be muting all of LG in the server. So I do think the mental game can work really well for LG, and they do these aggressive roams quite effectively. But I do think good international teams, the Team Liquids of the world, the BDSs of the world, will be able to shut this down when you look at the international meta and when you look at kind of the tougher opponents LG will be facing internationally. But I do want to talk a little bit more about that mental game, because I think it's another big strength of Luminosity. When we looked at the qualifiers from LG, they played back-to-back games against M80, and in both of those series, they lost the first map. Sometimes it was their map pick, sometimes it was their opponents, and then they came back to win both the second and third maps in the series, showing that LG can really do well in BO3s. Yeah, maybe they do take slow starts. I mean, losing Banks 7-1, their own map pick and one of their strongest maps against M80 is not what you want to see. But they still bounce back, winning Border, winning Cafe after that. We don't know the score lines of this first game against M80 because it was not shown on stream. The second game was also not shown on stream, but I guess we do have stats for that one. But I do think that kind of showcases the strong mental of LG, and that kind of comes back to them again, being a bit of a friendship team, being a team that maybe don't have the highest of stakes going to the Esports World Cup, but believing in themselves and being able to get these big upset teams not shaking when the games matter the most. And this game against LG, or this game against M80, was an elimination game. This was lose and you go home. So I like the prospects that LG are very good under pressure. We saw them typing in that last VOD as well. They're very good at maybe playing that mental game. And I think it's impressive to pull back a 2-1 or a 1-0 deficit in a best of 3, not just once, but twice back to back. Often when we see rematches in Siege, they go the way of the team that lost the first time. And so I think it's very impressive that LG managed to avoid that fate when they played M80 the second time. Now it's time to start talking about the actual bracket. And I don't love this bracket for Luminosity. I think they got a little unlucky here. First game up, they play against Team Bliss, the Australians. And this Team Bliss is a squad with lots of LAN experience, probably better prep, better experience coming into it, and maybe better individuals. It's really tough to say, but Bliss is a good team, and while they do come from a weaker regions with a huge amount of experience that LG don't have, it's going to be a really tough BO1 for LG to take on. It's a hard game to predict. LG could win it, Bliss could win it, but I think I favor Bliss when I look at that matchup, simply due to their experience. I think Bliss are a very strong team with good VOD review potential coming into it. And so I think Bliss are going to be favored. But I want to highlight both scenarios. So let's first suppose that they win against Team Bliss. If they win against Team Bliss, they'll play against Liquid. And it's important to keep in mind, both of these upper bracket games are BO1s. And I think this Team Liquid squad, despite the fact that I think Team Liquid are a very good team, might be the best case opponent for Luminosity. Because if there's any team that's going to throw a BO1 against a team like LG who have zero LAN experience, it's Team Liquid. There's no team maybe in the world that loves throwing as much as Team Liquid do. I think if LG can beat out Team Bliss and then find themselves in a BO1 against Team Liquid, they got a good chance of winning that game. Just because Team Liquid have been known to choke, and in a BO1, anything can happen. Obviously, I think Team Liquid are the better team. I love LG. I want to see that team succeed. But I think Team Liquid, just on paper, no matter how you cut it, are going to be the favorites going into that game. But for me, this looks like probably LG's best path into the top 8. I don't think it's unreasonable to think that they will beat Team Bliss, because again, I think that game is pretty 50-50 on paper, and then upset Team Liquid, play an aggressive game, find ways to catch Liquid off guard, tilt them in the in-game chat. I think it's super possible if we see them going through and winning this game. Now, if they do lose to Team Liquid, all of a sudden their chances get a little bit messier. So please ignore my poor Microsoft Paint drawings. But what will happen if LG beat Bliss but lose to Team Liquid is they will then play against the winner of the losers of this game. So if we assume Team Cruelty are going to lose their opening matchup, and we assume W7M are going to lose their matchup against SSG, which is not a guarantee, but it's a bit of a spoiler of my prediction for the next set of slides going forward, that would mean that LG would then play very likely W7M, as Team Cruelty aren't going to win a game in this tournament. Sorry to spoil that. So Luminosity versus W7M in this scenario would be the final game for the final spot in top 8. And it's a tough call, man. This W7M, if you'll remember, is the core of that Los team that made it to the Atlanta Major Grand Finals. Critically, they don't have Maya on their roster. That Maya is now playing for Team Liquid. So it's not the same team that made Atlanta Grand Finals, and I would argue it's a weaker team that made than the team that made Atlanta Grand Finals. I think LG can beat W7M in this potential scenario, but I don't think they're going to be favorites. If I had to bet, I'd probably put my money on W7M, again, just because of the experience factor. Now, what about the scenario where they don't beat Team Bliss? Again, I think probably the more likely scenario, but this game is up in the air. If they don't beat Team Bliss, that means they're going to fall to the losers bracket almost certainly against PSG Talent. Now, if they can't beat Team Bliss in a BO1, I worry about their odds of beating PSG Talon in a BO3. I think, although LG have done well in BO3s, as the underdogs in most of these games, BO3s are not going to favor them. And PSG Talon, I think, straight up are just a better squad than Team Bliss have looked. Now, it's tough to call. PSG Talon have 2 brand new players. Bliss are coming with a brand new coach. The analysis I'm kind of pulling on has to come from the Manchester Major, which is a little bit outdated, admittedly. But even if they were to beat PSG Talon in this lower bracket game, they would then have to play the loser of the winners, which is almost certainly going to be Space Station Gaming. Maybe it would be W7M. And if we were to enter this situation where LG both lost to Team Bliss, beat PSG Talon, and then found themselves in a rematch against SSG in a BO3, I don't know what would happen. Frankly, LG have already beaten Space Station Gaming in a best of 3. That happened in the closed qualifiers. LG beat Space Station to get to this tournament. SSG then won the 3rd place game, which is why they're also in this tournament. But as we know in Siege, very often the rematches favor the team that lost the first time, especially if that first time was an upset. Typically, the stronger, more experienced team, in which case this is Space Station, will come out and they'll be able to win the rematch. Now, it didn't happen with M80, so it's tough to call, right? It's going to be up in the air, and I think LG have the ability to beat Space Station in another BO3, but like a lot of these games we're talking about, I don't think they're going to be favorites. Ultimately, I believe this will be LG's fate. I think they're going to lose the first BO1 to Team Bliss, and then they'll lose to either Talon or Space Station or W7M if they come across them in the lower bracket. If they beat Team Bliss, I think their best chance of making top 8 will be beating Team Bliss in a BO1 and then beating Liquid in a BO1 right after that. I think for the first international tournament, it's unlikely that we're going to see LG making it into that top 8 of the tournament. That's really where the big guns come out. That's what you want to be. That's the final weekend. But it's doable. And there are paths to success for LG here. I think if they find themselves in the lower bracket at any point in time during this group stage, it is going to be tough. LG are not the only team going to the tournament. And we do have to talk about the second team, who we've already talked about a bit, Space Station Gaming. SSG are coming in, of course, with 2 world champions. Only one is pictured here. Of course, that's Fultz. They got J90 and Ashen, 2 of the best players in the entire world. Forrest is there as well, holding down the back lines. And we'll talk about their 5th player in a little bit. But before we do, we have to talk about their results when they had this 5-man roster. And of course, those results were pretty bad. During the Manchester Major, SSG didn't win a single game after the play-ins. And obviously, that's not the result they wanted. Obviously, that was a pretty poor showing from what you'd expect from SSG at an international major. But I think it's also important to look closer at these games. They lost 7-4 to ITB, 7-5 to BDS, and then they lost 7-5 and 7-4 to Team Liquid, with a 7-5 win thrown in the middle of that series as well. That means they lost their first BO1 against a decent ITB team. ITB, not a bad squad, but certainly, didn't do that much better than SSG. So they lost their first BO1 of the tournament against a team that was certainly beatable, but ultimately not free. And then they essentially were knocked out on paper right there. then they had to play back-to-back two of the top 4 teams at the tournament. And if they didn't beat either of them, which they didn't, they were guaranteed locked out in 15th place. So SSG honestly had a really terrible bracket in Manchester. And I don't think that there are actually 14 teams at that tournament that were better than SSG. Obviously, right? They did put themselves into that situation by losing to ITB. They shouldn't have lost that game. They did. They laid in the bed that they made. But ultimately, they had a rough tournament, regardless of the opponents they faced, and they ended up not winning a single game in Swiss. After that happened, they made a roster move. 2 big things happened to Iconic after the Manchester Major. Number 1, we learned that he was dealing with a pretty serious wrist injury, and that kind of gives an explanation to perhaps his performance, both with SSG and with some of the other teams that he'd been playing on since being dropped from, since leaving Astralis when that team disbanded a little over a year ago. And they picked up the world champion, Benja. I do want to quickly take a look at the stats as well for Iconic. He was the lowest rated player in North America, or the lowest rated North American player at the Major, I should say. He went 48 and 80, a 0.6 KD, one of the worst KDs that we saw. Again, I don't want to be too dogpiling onto Iconic just because we do know he's injured. I hope he can recover and that we see him back. But it's not incredibly surprising that SSG chose to replace him. And I think ultimately they made a really great roster move because they picked up the man on your screen right now, Benja Master, a world champion MVP. He won the hammer as the best player on G2 just a year and a half ago. And he is known to be an incredibly talented player coming in from Europe, but can be inconsistent at times. I took a look and graphed his EPS throughout the year playing for G2, and this is obviously all the games he played in Stage 1. Now, right off the bat, I want to say that EPS and other equivalent rating systems are not the be-all, end-all definition of how well a player played, but I do think they give you a good at-a-glance view. They give you a good first impression, how is a player doing? And you can see for Benja, in important games, in really important matches, he showed up. You see, the LCQ Grand Finals, he had the best game of the stage so far. The first game of Manchester, he had a really strong performance against Team Liquid. And the season opener, he had a really strong performance there, putting up 139 EPS as well. But you also notice from this graph, through the majority of the EUL group stage, he wasn't even putting up 100. In fact, not a single game in EUL groups after the home opener, or the season opener, did he get above a 100 EPS. And that's not be-all, end-all. That doesn't mean he played horribly, especially in these games where he put up 100, 98, 95. But there's some low numbers in here. And I don't care, what the objective analysis is. A 49 EPS just is not a good performance, and there's no other way to cut that. So we've seen Benja have some weak games. We've seen him have some really strong games as well. And I think SSG, they knew this when picking up Benja. I think SSG have a really positive team culture. I think arguably unlike G2, they have a team culture that maybe pulls a bit of pressure off of players like Benja, who I think has experienced a lot of pressure and has performed well under pressure, but has also performed poorly under some pressure. And so I do think SSG are the right team who can pull out a lot of potential out of Benja. So the roster move is the big story from SSG coming to this tournament, but just like Luminosity, I want to talk about maps. And the first map you got to talk about when you're talking about Space Station Gaming is Border. SSG are arguably the best Border team in the entire world. They're on an 8-game win streak here in closed competition, and closed competition is an important asterisk on that because while they did technically lose this map once, very recently to Oxygen Esports in the EWC Open Qualifiers. That was an Open Qualifier game, and if we're selective with our stats and we only include the closed qualifiers, SSG beat Oxygen on the rematch in the closed qualifiers on Border. So it's obviously a map that SSG enjoy quite a bit with that 8-game winning streak in closed competition. But it's also a map that they're mortal on. Obviously, this was one of the first games they played with Ashen on their team, but they lost to Oxygen. They rematched them in the closed qualifiers. They got the win, including the rematch win on Border. Now, unfortunately, we couldn't watch these games Just like a lot of the games in Esports World Cup, these matches were not shown on stream, so we can't say exactly how or why SSG won these matches or lost these matches on Border, but we can look at the other games that they played throughout the year. And since the season started, SSG Border stats are kind of ridiculous. Their defenses are fine. 50% win rate for SSG on Border, that's 6 wins and 6 losses, but their attacks, 80% win rate for SSG on their Border attacks. That comes from 8 wins and 2 losses attacking on Border. These stats come from 2 matches that they've played since the season started. Their first one against Luminosity in the NAL seeding match, and their second game against Team Liquid at the Major. That was the one game that SSG won during the Swiss phase at the Major against Team Liquid. So not the greatest of sample sizes, but I do think it paints a broad picture that SSG are monsters at attacking on Border. And we can break these stats down even further. When looking at bomb sites, there's 2 sites that really stick out for me. The first one is Armory Locker's Archives. SSG attacked this bomb site 4 times. They succeeded 3 times. The other one is actually Ventilation Workshop, a 100% win rate, and they've attacked this bomb site 3 times. So all in all, again, small sample size, I don't want to draw too broad conclusions, but I think it does showcase that SSG are very strong attacking on 2 of the most popular bomb sites on this map. For Bathroom Tellers, they only played it twice. They won it once, they lost it once. Custom Supply, they only played it once. That was, of course, a round win here. So already just looking at the stats, things look very good for SSG on this map. And when you look at things a little bit deeper, when you don't just look at the numbers, when you analyze the gameplay, there's one thing, especially from that Team Liquid match, that stood out to SSG's success on this map, and it's Forest on Monty. SSG have a 100% win rate when they play Monty on Border this season. They've played 4 rounds total. Luminosity in their game against SSG were smart enough to ban the Monty. Team Liquid were not. And when they played Team Liquid at the Manchester Major, the Monty was a huge factor. I want to just show you kind of the progress of this game. This game started with a 5-3 lead for Team Liquid. They moved on to defense. SSG did not run a Monty in round number 7. They did not run a Monty in round number 8. And as we play this VOD, you'll notice this round goes really poorly for them. They go down 5-1. They don't get anything going on this push. And after Team Liquid take a 5-3 lead, Callout calls a tactical timeout. And many people have wondered, what is Callout saying here? I actually got the leaked transcripts. Callout is saying to his teammates in this moment, guys, play Monty. Monty is the most busted operator in the game right now. Forest, I need you to play Monty. Monty, Monty, Monty. Guys, there's nothing else to say during this tac timeout. There's nothing else that needs to be going into. We play the Montaigne. And then we see the coach of Team Liquid. He's saying, these idiots, they've got 5 guns. They can't do anything against us. Guys, we have nothing to worry about. There's nothing they can do over on that SSG side. We're not worried. And False is listening to this. He's like, okay, Force is going to play Monty. I understand. And then we see his teammate. All of them are going to be thinking, listen, we're going to play Monty. Force there sitting in the middle. He's thinking, okay, I need to pick Monty. The coach of Team Liquid high fives his boys. He says, guys, we have nothing to worry about. On SSG, they lock in. They pick the Monty. And they run the Monty every single round throughout this game, winning every single one of them. There's Forest playing it now. And I'm not going to make you watch every single Monty attack on this border for SSG, but I do want to watch the first one here because it's really beautiful. The way not just Forest plays the Monty, but the way Ashen works around the Monty. Ashen on Ash and Forest on Monty is an incredibly strong combination that every single team that goes against SSG at the Esports World Cup is going to have to think about and is going to have to deal with. I'll go a little bit fast forward in this round because they first try to use this Monty to clear Maya out of CCTV. So Forest is going to start to try to make the moves to push Maya out. And again, it's really good coordination with Maya. Understanding break room is a problem. The Monty pushes him in, and then Ashen from the break room door finds the frag, taking him out. You see Ashen coming in from the side here, Forest coming in from the doorway. They pinch him, they get the pick. The Monty is not done yet though from Forest. He continues to push on through the hallway. He makes it into offices. He finds the Mira, who they can't get a pinch on, but they do force Nesk back out of there. And the Monty continues to find value for the team. Takes a little bit of damage, but spots the guy in the Mira window. This is Solus in the Mira window, and what is he able to do? Time and time again, He's feeding intel to Ashen. Ashen then walks in through, there it is, walks in through Fountain, finds that frag onto Palu, eventually finds another kill. Forrest dies in the middle of this, but it really showcases how effective Ashen in particular can push with this Montaigne and how good SSG are with this strategy. As I mentioned, they will go on to not only win this round, resets Bates in a 1v3 for a very long time, but they win this entire game, and they win it 7-5, Forrest playing the Monty every single time, coming back from that 5-3 deficit. So that's kind of our baseline analysis of Border. Obviously, there's things people can do against SG to counter this, ban the Border, ban the Monty, but it's something that's going to take up their ban slots. Now, Border is not the only map that SSG are good at. I also want to talk about Nighthaven Labs. Now, Nighthaven Labs is a map that's been played quite a lot in North America recently. Chat, does anybody know where in the lore Nighthaven Labs is located? Does anybody know where in the world Nighthaven Labs is actually set? It's not Ireland. If you are to believe the wiki and the lore told to you by Ubisoft, you might think that this map is located in Singapore. Many people think this map is located just off the shore in Singapore. But many people would be wrong, because much like Guantanamo Bay, this piece of foreign land is owned and operated by the United States of America. NA owns Nighthaven Labs, and it's not particularly close. If you look at the stats, at the Manchester Major, NA went 5-0, undefeated on Nighthaven Labs. And other than the single game where M80 played an 8-6 match against Team Liquid, these matches weren't close. 7-3 against Cyclops, 7-2 against Scars, 7-2 against ITB, and against one of the best teams in the world, 7-4 from Beast Coast on Nighthaven. North America runs this map. It is a dominant map for NA, but you'll notice there's 3 North American teams that are represented in these 5 wins. And one of them, and there were 4 teams ultimately that went to the Major. The one that's not here, of course, is a team we're talking about, Space Station. And the reason Space Station didn't play Nighthaven Labs at the Major is because they banned it. Every single game, even against Team Cruelty, even against teams they should be slamming, when SSG walked into a match during the Major, they banned Nighthaven Labs. First phase, every single time. They did not get a single chance to play this map because they didn't want to. But that has started to change. Through the Esports World Cup qualifier, SSG played Nighthaven 3 times, showing that they've been working on it, showing that they've been bringing more and more Nighthaven into their map pool. And while the results haven't been amazing, they lost to Oxygen, they lost to Luminosity, it shows that there's a lot of potential for SSG on this map, especially given that they're going to be playing against international opponents. I think it's very deliberate that SSG have started to work this map into their map pool, noticing how strong it is for North America. Now, they did play this map on stream against the Sonics. Unfortunately, I don't think the VOD was posted anywhere. I couldn't find the VOD. But this was, again, a map where SSG were losing 5-3 against the Sonics on Nighthaven Labs. And again, called a tactical timeout, and they ended up winning the match 7-5. Now, it wasn't as obvious that they just pulled out a Monty and then won every round from there. It wasn't as simple, the adaptations that they were making. But it does still show how good of a coach callout is, and I do want to take just a second to highlight the incredible effectiveness of that tactical timeout that SSG have. A lot of it, I think, comes down to the really strong mental game that SSG have and their ability to bounce back in these tactical timeouts. Again, I think that mental game is going to be really huge for Benja to maybe add on to consistency and show up for SSG. Now, the bracket, I thought the bracket was kind of bad for Luminosity. I think it's about average for SSG. It's not a great bracket for them. It's not the worst thing in the world. They get W7M right off the rip, and I think SSG are the favorites in this game. W7M have not been looking like the best inside of Brazil. They're a team with potential. They know what international experience is like. They are from Brazil, one of the strongest regions in the world. But even though SSG have a new pickup, I think SSG are the odds-on favorite for this game. The problem is, when SSG eventually beat W7M, if they do, then they play BDS. And this will likely be the first real test that BDS face in the tournament, because their first game is against Cruelty, and Cruelty suck. Cruelty are not going to win a single game through this tournament. So SSG versus BDS will kind of be the game that tells us, are BDS far and away the favorites to win this tournament, or are there some cracks? Is this tournament wide open for anybody to come out and win, including SSG? Now again, just like for Luminosity, I want to talk about the different scenarios. So first I want to talk about the possible, but I would say unlikely scenario, where they lose to W7M. If they lose to W7M, they will then play Team Cruelty in the lower bracket. They're going to shit on Team Cruelty. I have no fear, especially because SSG are used to scrimming against Team Cruelty, playing in the North American region. They should easily take down Team Cruelty in their lower bracket game. Then they'll go on to play against the loser of the winners on the other side of the bracket. So they'll likely to go on to play against whichever team wins against Luminosity and Team Bliss. Now, as I've said, I expect this to be Team Bliss, but whoever SSG end up playing against, whether that's Bliss or LG, I think SSG will be favorites. Team Bliss are coming in with a brand new coach. LG are coming in with a brand new player. SSG are too. But on paper, SSG, I think, are a stronger roster than either of those two teams. Yes, they've lost to Luminosity before, but as we discussed, I think in the rematch, SSG will be favored. So while both teams are threats and SSG would have to take either opponent seriously, I think SSG has the ability to beat both of them. Now suppose SSG beat W7M. Again, they'll go on to play against BDS. I think they lose that pretty decisively. I'm hoping for a miracle. I'd love to see SSG do it, but BDS look like the best team with this tournament. So if they lose that, then they're in a weird spot, because they will play either the loser of this game, LG versus Bliss, or they'll play against Team Talon. I assume Talon lose against Liquid. So the nice thing about SSG with this bracket overall is, yeah, they got BDS on their side, and yeah, Liquid's in their group, but they almost certainly won't play against Team Liquid, because Liquid will just ride on through and they'll never end up in the lower bracket. When inevitably SSG do end up in the lower bracket, because they'll probably not beat BDS, they're going to be playing a very beatable opponent. All three of these teams down here on the other side of the bracket are teams that SSG should be beating. Talon, LG, and Bliss are all teams SSG should be favored against. Thus, I think there's a very high chance that SSG, no matter who they go up against in the lower bracket, will end up top 8. Now, if we assume SSG makes it to top 8, but they do lose to BDS, and thus they go to top 8 through the lower bracket, that means their quarterfinal opponent will be against one of the upper bracket teams from Group B. And in my opinion, that means their quarterfinal matchup will likely be against either FaZe Clan or Furia. I don't think SSG has the potential to beat either of those teams. Maybe they have the potential, right? I think anything is possible. And SSG is a good team. But especially with Ben just so brand new to the roster, I think those Brazilian juggernauts of Furia, FaZe, will be too much for SSG. I should note as well, Dark Zero is another potential quarterfinal opponent for SSG if Dark Zero can upset Furia and make it through the upper bracket. But regardless of who they face, my final prediction for SSG is that they make top 8, but they go no further. I think the bracket is just too tough for them. But if they can show some good stuff, if they get some dominant wins over one of these three teams, if they destroy W7M, maybe they go close against BDS, and then they have a good quarterfinal game against FaZe or Furia or whoever they end up playing, I think they'll be happy. This is an SSG team that doesn't need to win this tournament. They've just changed out a really impactful player. This is a team that I think is looking to improve, to show what they can do with a new roster, and then go into Montreal, go into SI with a lot of confidence, and hopefully win that game. Or win those tournaments, I should say. So that's my prediction for SSG. Of course, there's one more North American team we have to talk about. Dark Zero. I don't want to mince words here. Dark Zero are North America's best chance at winning the Esports World Cup. Top 8 in Atlanta, top 6 in Sao Paulo, top 4 in Manchester. Dark Zero, if the trend continues, are looking at a top 2 here at the Esports World Cup, and I think they have a realistic chance of getting that top 2. Now, for those who don't know Dark Zero, of course, they play a very set-in-stone playstyle. They will almost always have the roaming duo of Pambazoo and Bolo out there on the defense, roaming around the map. Canadian will also be somewhere out on the roam, supporting those players, either feeding them intel or trying to make moves off the distraction that those two roamers are playing. And then that typically leaves NJR, who you see on the screen here, and Nafe to lock down the bomb site. This is a super standard way that Dark Zero like to play their defenses. On attack, Dark Zero would typically have Pambazoo grabbing those entry operators like Ash, like Ying, making that entry space for Dark Zero. They'll let Bolo, NJR, and Nafe flex around to really whatever the team needs, play a wide variety of operators, and then Canadian will be on something fucking stupid like a Monty, a Blitz, a Ying, or some abusive operator that Dark Zero love to run. As always, I want to talk about the maps. And as always for these NA teams, I gotta talk about Nighthaven Labs, because Dark Zero are maybe the best Nighthaven team in the entire world. It's them or Beast Coast. End of the day, these teams are the reason why NA is so good at Nighthaven Labs, and the stats here are pretty fucking ridiculous for Dark Zero. Since picking up Nathan Bolo, Dark Zero are 6-0, undefeated, playing Nighthaven Labs. And the stats since this season started are pretty ridiculous as well. Since they picked up Nathan Bolo, they are 22-12 on attack, and they are 22-7 on defense. Dominant on both sides of the map. And since it's such a large sample size, I don't think there's one simple thing that Dark Zero do that make them a better Nighthaven team than anybody else in the world. I think it's a deep understanding of this map. It is lots and lots of rep. But I do want to show you one round on this map, and that is the last time that Dark Zero played this map. So I want to show you the last round that they played against Team Bliss on Nighthaven Labs, because I think it perfectly kind of showcases the style of that Dark Zero want to play on their defense. First and foremost, you've got a roaming duo, not so much roaming in this round because it is top floor Nighthaven, but you've got an aggressive duo of Pamba and Bolo working together. This round, it's trying to keep the walls closed, IT wall, connector wall. These are the important walls for these two players to be playing. You're also going to see Pambazoo step forward and be the main entry player in this round. He's going to get that opening pick. You'll notice Canadian is playing down in the basement in a weird, ratty spot for his team, trying to make moves off his team's aggression, and you'll see that work very, very well. And then you see kind of NJR and Nafe, and in this situation, it'll be Bolo as well, holding down the fort, being that anchor duo for Dark Zero to eventually win the late round. Now, they're going to start with this push, getting into connector. Pambazoo, he's reinforcing the walls to set up for a C4, which he will eventually utilize. They don't actually keep the walls closed. The Bandit Battery isn't for tricking in this, but it's simply to enable that potential to trick and then delay a bit of time, force the Thatcher to be brought by Sajin. Not that it was even necessary on these particular walls. Canadian, we see now down in the basement. As they get into connector, we start to see the opening pick. Pambazoo over the connector wall, finds a pick onto Bolo. Canadian then from down below also tries to make a play off his teammates' work. You see him just there at the bottom of the screen, finds the second pick onto Oda, and all of a sudden things are falling apart for Bliss. Yeah, they lose one. Yeah, they lose two, but it's a strong anchor setup again. Bolo able to find up a pick. Canadian down below, wasting some time. I think he dies. Nah, he gets a pick. Classic Dark Zero on their favorite map in the entire game. And Wettables, I love him. Doesn't win that one. So that's Dark Zero, broad playstyle. That's Dark Zero's favorite map. Next, I want to talk about Simply DZ's attacks. Here we see two handsome men on Dark Zero and a third handsome man right there to the side who dreams of one day playing on the level of Dark Zero but will never achieve it. We gotta talk about DZ's attacks, because Dark Zero in Manchester had the second highest attacking win rate of any team at the event. They won 55% of their attacks overall. They also had the third highest attacking recovery, winning 42% of rounds where they lost the opening pick. I think that kind of speaks to the idea that Dark Zero, even if they don't win that entry, even if things go poorly, are very good at controlling these attacking rounds and pulling them back into their favor regardless. And they also had the highest plant percentage of any team at the Manchester Major, planting in 38% of their attacking rounds. And this is not just a one-off tournament either. This is the second tournament in a row where Dark Zero have been one of the best attacking teams. Since picking up Bolo and picking up Nafe, Dark Zero have dominated on the attack both in Sao Paulo and at Manchester. And I would make the argument that at both of these events, Dark Zero have honed in on one specific operator and dominated with that operator. At the start of Sao Paulo, nobody realized Ying was going to be a problem for Dark Zero. Eventually, teams started to pick onto it, and by the end of the tournament, every single person was banning Ying at the end of Manchester, or at the end of Sao Paulo. Then going into Manchester, every single team banned the Ying against Dark Zero. They understood it was a threat, but what they didn't realize was Ying was no longer the problem for Dark Zero. Because in Manchester, they started running more and more and more Monty, and they absolutely dominated. Because the thing is with Dark Zero, they will always ban Dokkaebi on the attack. Except for the one weird round where they banned Glaz against BDS, but I think we can chalk that up to a mistake. Typically, Dark Zero will always ban out the Dokkaebi. That means that the enemy team has to choose. Do they want to go up against a Ying or do they want to go up against a Monty? And Dark Zero have proven they are exceptionally good at both of these operators. A 50% win rate, keep in mind, Sao Paulo was one of the most defender-sided tournaments we've ever seen in Siege. So a 50% win rate with Ying is incredibly good. 20% pick rate, that includes rounds where Ying was banned. So a 20% pick rate plus a 47% ban rate, again, DZ never banned Ying, never banned Monty, means that's a presence rate of about 74% for Ying for Dark Zero in Sao Paulo. Again, the 27% pick rate maybe seems a little low, the 50% win rate seems a little low, but that's because a huge ban rate came through and because the win rate overall in Sao Paulo was very low for attackers. Then you take a look at the Monty inside of Manchester. A 73% attacking win rate with Monty. That's absurd. That's unheard of from any team with any operator. But for an operator that they played more than 1/4 of all the rounds they played was ridiculous. The reason the ban rate is like kind of low is because it took a long time for teams to realize they needed to ban Monty against Dark Zero in Manchester. Right, Sao Paulo was a much longer tournament than Manchester was, so by the time teams realized, okay, we need to ban the Ying, there was a lot of tournaments still to be played. By the time teams realized, shit, we gotta ban Monty against Dark Zero, they're busted with this operator, 73%, we were already a good 2/3 of the way through the tournament. So these two operators were really the story for Dark Zero inside of Manchester. I want to move on to talk, I know we're jumping around a little bit, I wanted to talk a little bit about Border as a map for Dark Zero now. Because we've talked about their Nighthaven labs being super strong. We've talked about their operators of Ying and Monty being ridiculously good. I want to talk about Border because it's a map that Dark Zero have played a lot recently. But again, it's hard to tell how good they really are on it. In the NAL playoffs, every single opponent wanted to play Border against Dark Zero. Luminosity picked Border against DZ. Oxygen picked Border against DZ. And then Beast Coast let Border through as the decider against DZ. And every single team that wanted to play Border lost to Dark Zero, with the exception of Beast Coast, who did win 7-3, but I will remind you, this 7-3 Border game against Dark Zero was DZ's like 6th game they played of the night. It was 9 hours into a brutally long day for Dark Zero. That was when Dark Zero had to play 2 BO3s in one day due to scheduling problems. So I think this 7-3 can kind of be written off as not a true representation of Dark Zero's skill on Border. Then in Manchester, Dark Zero chose Border versus BDS, and they kind of looked awful on it. Pambazoo went invisible in this game. Dark Zero just looked like they completely fumbled the map bans, fumbled the operator bans, especially in Oregon. This was a disaster. With Pamba not showing up and Canadian on the team, they couldn't keep up with Usus and Leaky Fac in what is a very frag-focused map of Border. But then in the Esports World Cup closed qualifiers, DZ didn't give up on the map. It went from being a map that teams would consistently choose against Dark Zero to a map that teams consistently had it chosen against them. Dark Zero choosing Border against Sonics, choosing Border against Wildcard, and crushing them. 7-1 win over Wildcard, 7-4 win over the Sonics. This map has turned into a really strong map for DZ. Now, I don't want to go too crazy in depth onto Dark Zero on Border, because actually Highbear had a really good video about how Dark Zero played Border in their match against the Sonics. I recommend you go watch that video, but a lot of what they did was rushes. And I want to quickly show you the 3 rushes Dark Zero did on Border top floor, which let them win this map against Sonics. First and foremost, They ran a pretty basic push, clearing out the break room while pressuring in onto Archives. The thing I want you to check, the thing I want you to keep in mind is NJR's presence on this round. He got a pick pushing in the Archives door while the rest of the team cleared out through break room, and then that enabled the team to come in and start forcing a plant after they completely annihilated the whole break room hold and then pushed in through lockers to get that plant down. So they clear break room, they pressure Archives, they plant lockers, they win the round. The second time they attacked this bomb site, they did an OSA push. And you know I'm not a fan of the OSA, okay? This is no secret. I don't love this operator. However, they did something really smart with it. They did something that I've said is actually quite good with OSA on this bomb site. And that's that they used it more as a distraction. Again, Dark Zero are pushing from 2 angles. As they go for their OSA push inside of Archives, they sent Pambazoo up the hatch on Amaru. And Pambazoo caused chaos with this operator. He came up the hatch, shit on one guy, pulled out the SMG-11, shit on a second guy, and at this point, the round was basically won for Dark Zero. It's another pinch onto the bomb site. It's another little rush strategy. Pamba gets a 3K, and it's a beautiful way to get a plant down and again win the round for Dark Zero. The third and final time they attacked this bomb site was the worst start to the round yet. This round started off with a 3-4 man disadvantage. They again tried to clear break room just like they did the first time they attacked this bomb site, but it didn't go very well. Bolo lost his fights, they lost Pambazoo early on the entry as well. They ended up in a position with a man disadvantage. But what they did next was kind of ridiculous. We saw Canadian jump on the Grim, go to the bottom floor, and start to use Grimbees to force a pick onto Ambi from Nafe. At that point, they used more great Grim play and ridiculous utility like the smokes on NJR and the flashes on Nafe to put together a beautiful 3v3 execute in the last 30 seconds of this round to make the push look so good. The utility management from Canadian and the rest of the team was incredible in this round. I also want to quickly mention, this was, I believe, round 6. Dark Zero so far in this game have planted 5 times. And they're about to plant again. Yeah, currently Diffuse Kit is being held, but with good Grim play and good smoke play, stopping the mirror window from being effective, they rush in through the site. They use the Grim Bees to get a pick. 2 different angles being utilized on him. Canadian rushes past. They start a plant. I think they don't technically finish it. Nah, they don't. But basically 6 plants. Basically 2 rushes, 3 rounds with good pitching coming through on that top floor. Dark Zero are looking very, very good on border, and it's going to be a map that teams need to watch out for when they play DZ at the Esports World Cup. This begs the question. After that last round, we saw Sao Paulo get dominated on with the Monty. We saw Manchester be dominated by, Sao Paulo was dominated by the Ying. Manchester was dominated by the Monty. This begs the question, will Riyadh be dominated by the Grim? Because that last round where Canadian played the Grim was excellent, and the way DZ played around the Grim was also excellent. I think it's very, very likely that at the Esports World Cup, everybody will be banning Monty against Dark Zero, just like they started banning Ying against Dark Zero at the Manchester Major. I also don't know if Ying is really that operator for DZ anymore. Ying's overall win rate at the Manchester Major was 36%, and for Dark Zero, it was 12%. Horrendous. So maybe DZ will start to wane off the Ying a little bit. They probably won't get many opportunities to play the Monty. This could be the summer of Grim for Dark Zero. So it's going to be interesting to see what attacking operators Dark Zero really rely on, but we've seen a trend of DZ really leaning into one operator in particular on the attack, and my prediction is it might be Grim coming through with the Esports World Cup. So now we talk about the bracket, and I said the bracket for Luminosity wasn't great. The bracket for SSG was okay. The bracket for Dark Zero is pretty great. It's very good. Right off rip, Dark Zero play against GK. Now, Dark Zero, GK are a team that lost against Cyclops in the last event. They didn't win a single game in Swiss. GK are a bad team. Dark Zero will beat GK. Don't gotta talk about that too much. GK are not looking good right now. DZ win that. But just like before, I want to walk through every scenario. If Dark Zero happened to lose against GK by some best of one freak accident, they then go to the lower bracket all the way down here, where they will likely play against ITB, who I don't expect will be able to beat Furia. Dark Zero beat ITB, especially with Nafe having secret intel on how the British play Rainbow Six Siege. I think Dark Zero will win that game. They're a much more experienced and a much deeper team than ITB, and they're also just so much more consistent. Dark Zero, with their wealth of international experience, I think will beat ITB should they meet them in the lower bracket, especially in a BO3. With how good DZ's map pool is and with their experience at international events, I, again, don't think this is a game DZ can lose. So if Dark Zero are to beat ITB in this game, they move on to this game, where they will then face the loser of this game here, which will end up being very likely Wolves. I expect Wolves to beat Bleed, FaZe to beat Scars, and then FaZe to beat Wolves. Again, this game is hard to predict because Wolves have 2 brand new players on their roster. But I think Dark Zero, more LAN experience playing as a unit, a deeper team overall, I think they're going to be fine. Dark Zero have never actually lost. This, I'll also say, this could be Bleed. Bleed could beat Wolves if Wolves really don't show up this tournament. Either team loses to FaZe. Either team, I think, loses to Dark Zero. DZ has never actually lost to Wolves or Bleed in their entire history, but they've never played against Wolves, and their one game against Bleed was an 8-7 match back in Atlanta when DZ had a slightly different roster. So I wouldn't read too much into that, but I do think in either case, with Wolves and Bleed both think of new teams, Dark Zero, any game they play in the lower bracket, should easily take. Now let's go back to Sanity. Let's say Dark Zero beat GK. They then play against Furia in the upper bracket, and DZ could win this game. It's going to be tough, but for me, this is like probably the most exciting game of the entire Esports World Cup. We were robbed of Dark Zero versus Furia, then known as W7, at the 6th Invitational by G2, when G2 beat Dark Zero in Sao Paulo in the main stage, and then went on to completely fumble against DZ. DZ are coming into this tournament as a much better team than they were in Sao Paulo. They're coming into this as an extremely dominant team, where Furia have kind of been on the back foot, falling out in the quarterfinals of the Manchester Major. Obviously, they're the world champions. Obviously, they're the best team, arguably, to ever play this game. It's going to be a tough game, and if I'm a betting man, I'm going to put my money on Furia, but you can't count Dark Zero out of this. Dark Zero, especially in a BO1, don't forget, this is an upper bracket game, it's a BO1, have the potential who wins this. Even if they lose, I don't think it matters much. I assume they will lose. If Dark Zero fall, then they will go up against the winner of the losers of these 2 games. Scars will probably not win a single game in these 4 in the second half of this bracket, which means this game will likely be Dark Zero up against Bleed, maybe Wolves. As we talked about, I think DZ beat both those teams. Far more experienced, far more international, far more time playing with their roster, far deeper pools, far more structured team. I think they're going to be fine. And so that leaves us with the top 8 quarterfinals game. And this is where it kind of is interesting for Dark Zero. Because in top 8, if they beat Furia, they're going to play against a lower bracket team from the other group. That's a pretty simple run in my opinion, to the semifinals and then potentially to the grand finals as well. But if Dark Zero lose to Furia, as I think they might, that means that their first round opponent will likely be a coin flip between BDS and Liquid. If we get robbed of Dark Zero versus BDS in the quarterfinals, I'm gonna lose my mind. That game, I think, will be the grand finals game. I think if Dark Zero can avoid BDS in the bracket, if they can make it to the other side, they should be facing top 2 against BDS. I think DZ look like the best team out of North America. I think they look better than any team outside of Brazil, although it could be close. FaZe will be contenders for this tournament. I think that Liquid will be contenders for this tournament. I think Furia will be contenders. DZ, I think, have an easy enough bracket and could have an easy enough time in the actual top 8 bracket to make it all the way to the grand finals. Do they beat BDS? Probably not. BDS are the odds-on favorite for this tournament, and I don't see any other team easily taking them out. So my final prediction for Dark Zero is going to be top 2. But again, it's hard to go too deep into this just without knowing the bracket as a whole. And those are the 3 North American teams that are heading to the Manchester Major. I hope that you've learned something. I hope that you enjoyed this analysis stream going over all 3 teams from NA. Tell me what you thought. We are, of course, going to be co-streaming the rest of the Esports World Cup, the entirety of it, starting Wednesday at 4 a.m. So I hope to see you all there, and I hope that you've enjoyed the stream.